The year is 1884. A quiet street in Munich rests under the amber glow of late afternoon. Leaves rustle softly on the chestnut trees that line the modest garden behind a comfortable middle-class home. Inside, a small boy sits cross-legged on the wooden floor, a compass clutched in his hands. He is 5 years old, with dark, thoughtful eyes and a shock of hair already hinting at its future wildness. The needle trembles under the glass, pointing north with an invisible certainty that captivates him. He tilts the compass left, then right, but the needle always returns to its mysterious direction. In the stillness of the room, dust motes dance in a shaft of sunlight falling through the lace curtains. The boy's father, Hermann, has explained that the needle follows the Earth's magnetic field, but such words are too small for the wonder blooming in his chest. For Albert, there is something vast and hidden behind the surface of things, something he can almost feel but never grasp. He whispers to himself, as if the universe were listening. Outside, the garden is a sanctuary of gentle order. His mother, Pauline, tends to her roses with quiet precision, her hands moving through the blooms like a musician's over piano keys. She is a cultured woman with a deep love for music, and in the evenings she will guide young Albert's fingers over the violin's strings, teaching him to find melodies in the silence. The scent of fresh soil and petals drifts through the open window, mingling with the faint sound of a distant horse-drawn carriage clattering over cobblestones. Albert's sister, Maya, plays with a wooden doll near the garden wall, her laughter a soft ripple in the warm air. The city around them is prosperous and orderly, its Bavarian architecture adorned with ornate facades and steep-tiled roofs that catch the golden light. From a nearby church, bells toll the hour, their deep resonance spreading like ripples on a calm pond. Time moves slowly in this world, measured by the rhythm of sun and shadow, not by the urgent ticking of clocks. When Albert is 10, he discovers a second treasure. A family friend, a medical student named Max Talmud, brings a gift, a small, well-worn geometry book. The boy opens it on the same wooden floor, and the world shifts. He traces the lines and angles with his fingertip, marveling at how immutable truths emerge from simple axioms. Here, in the elegance of Euclid, he finds a kind of sacred music, as pure as the notes he coaxes from his violin. The pages smell of old paper and ink, and the lamplight flickers gently as evening deepens outside the window. His father's engineering workshop is not far away, where dynamos and electric lights hint at the invisible forces that shape the modern age. But for Albert, the geometry book is an engine of pure thought, a realm where the mind can travel without moving. He works through the proofs alone, often late into the night, the house silent around him. The peace of that solitary exploration becomes a lifelong companion, a quiet harbor in the years ahead. Summers take the family to the foothills of the Alps, where the air is thin and crisp. Albert walks the mountain paths with his sister, the grass underfoot springy and damp with morning dew. The peaks rise around them in tiers of gray and green, their slopes dotted with wildflowers that bob gently in the breeze. He watches the cloud shadows race across the valleys below, tracking how light and darkness play across the meadow. In these moments, he is not yet thinking of relativity, but he is already in love with the mysteries of light. He lies on his back in the grass, staring at the deep blue sky, and wonders what it would be like to ride on a sunbeam, to travel with it across the infinite distance. The hum of insects and the distant clang of cowbells form a drowsy soundtrack. No one rushes him. The world is content to let a quiet boy dream. Back in Munich, the family business slowly falters. Hermann and his brother Jacob run an electrical engineering company that once thrived, but now competitors press close. The workshop, with its smell of oil and sparking coils, becomes a place of whispered worry. Albert senses the tension but retreats into his own inner world, where equations and melodies offer a steadier ground. The house on Adelsreiter Strasse remains a haven, its rooms filled with the warm glow of afternoon. Yet change is coming, like the first chill of autumn. The family will soon move to Italy, seeking new opportunities in the sunlit city of Milan. Before that departure, Albert must finish his studies in Munich, left behind in the care of relatives. The loneliness of those months will teach him the weight of silence, but also its strange comfort. In the empty rooms, he plays his violin, the notes echoing through the space, and reads philosophy that speaks of the infinite. At 15, longing for the warmth of his family, he leaves the rigid German school system and rejoins his parents in Italy. The train journey south is a revelation. Outside the window, the Bavarian pines give way to vineyards and shimmering olive groves. The light itself changes, growing softer, more golden, spilling over terracotta rooftops and ancient stone villages. He presses his forehead to the cool glass, watching the landscape flow like a river. Milan greets him with bright piazzas and the scent of fresh bread. In his father's new workshop, he tinkers with designs for electrical meters, his hands finding a natural rhythm. But his heart still chases the deeper questions. He climbs to the roof of the family's apartment and lies on the tiles, still warm from the sun, gazing at the stars. The constellations will slowly overhead, and he feels the earth turning beneath him, a quiet motion through the dark. The wanderings of those teenage years continue when he fails his first entrance exam to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic. He is sent to a progressive school in the town of Aarau, nestled between the Jura Mountains and the gentle Aare River. The school's philosophy embraces freedom of thought, and Albert blossoms in its sun-filled classrooms. His teachers note the quiet intensity with which he approaches physics, the way he lingers after lessons to ask questions about the nature of light. After classes, he walks along the riverbank, watching the water glimmer under the afternoon sun. The town is peaceful, its half-timbered houses and cobblestone streets a picture of Swiss serenity. Here, he begins to sculpt the thought experiment that will follow him into his dreams, chasing a beam of light. The idea is simple and impossible, like a riddle whispered by the breeze. But it plants a seed that will lie dormant until the quiet years in Bern, waiting to bloom. In 1896, he finally enters the Polytechnic in Zurich, a beautiful city cupped by lake and mountains. The lecture halls are filled with the soft scratching of pens and the rustle of notebooks. He meets a young Serbian woman, Miliva Merrick, whose dark eyes mirror his own curiosity. Together they sit by the tranquil Zurich Sea, the water lapping gently at the stone steps, and talk of physics and music and the boundless universe. The days are long and hazy, filled with the scent of chestnut blossoms and the distant call of swans. Albert often skips classes to read alone in the library, preferring the company of books to the formal lectures. In the dappled light filtering through tall windows, he traces the logic of Maxwell and Hertz, building a silent cathedral of thought. The city hums distantly outside, but inside the library, time stands still. The boy who watched the compass needle has become a young man peering into the deep patterns of creation, and the world is still a quiet, luminous mystery. The Swiss city of Bern rises along the arc of the Aare River like a medieval illustration come to life. Its clock tower, the Zitglocke, chimes the hours with a mechanical dance of painted figures, and the cobbled streets wind beneath arcaded sandstone buildings that glow apricot in the evening light. In 1902, Albert Einstein arrives here, a young man of 23 with a newly minted diploma and a quiet hunger for certainty. He has taken a post at the Federal Office for Intellectual Property, a place of orderly desks, brass lamps, and the soft rustle of patent applications. Each morning, he walks from his rented room on Kramgas, past fountains decorated with ancient bears, under the shadow of the high clock face. The city is small and unhurried, its rhythm set by the flow of the river and the tolling of bells. In the early mist, the sandstone hues soften to a honeyed warmth, and the mountains stand guard on the horizon, their peaks tipped with snow even in summer. It is here, in the stillness of routine, that a revolution will take shape. The patent office occupies a stately building on Speichergasse. Inside, the air carries the faint scent of ink and old paper, and tall windows illuminate the long room where Albert sits at a wooden desk. Around him, other clerks bend over their work, their pens scratching in a steady cadence. A brass lamp with a green glass shade casts a warm amber pool onto his papers. His hands move methodically through the inventions, a new kind of electric clock, a device for synchronizing railway signals, a better way to transmit sound over wires. His mind, however, travels far beyond the diagrams. In the quiet intervals between applications, he gazes out the window at the passing trams and the orderly flow of pedestrians. The sun traces a slow arc across the floor, illuminating motes of floating dust. Here, in this temple of practical knowledge, he finds space to dream. The job is his anchor, providing a modest income and a gentle rhythm that leaves his evenings free for the deeper questions that had followed him from his boyhood. After work, he often strolls along the Ara River with his new wife, Mileva. The river glides by with a glassy stillness, reflecting the willow trees and the stone arches of the bridges. They walk arm in arm, speaking in low voices about the physics of Maxwell and Lorentz, their words mingling with the sound of water over smooth stones. As evening deepens, the gas lamps along the promenade flicker to life, mirroring themselves in the darkening water. The city's silhouette gradually softens into twilight blue. Sometimes they stop at a small cafe near the cathedral, where the scent of fresh bread and coffee drifts out into the cooling air. Albert traces equations on the tablecloth with a fingertip, his expression far away. Mileva listens, her dark eyes reflecting the candle flame. These gentle hours are the cradle of the most profound ideas, nurtured by love and tranquility. In his small apartment, the furniture is simple: a few chairs, a bookcase stuffed with volumes of physics and philosophy, and a wooden music stand for his violin. At night, when the streets outside fall quiet, he lights the kerosene lamp and sits in his armchair, a notebook on his knee. On these pages, he sketches thought experiments rather than calculations. He imagines himself riding alongside a beam of light, racing through space at unimaginable speeds. What would he see? Would time itself stretch and slow? The tick of the clock on the wall becomes a meditation. Outside, the occasional clip-clop of a horse's hooves echoes on the cobblestones, then fades. The room is warm with the amber glow of the lamp, and outside the single window, the stars are sharp and cold above the rooftops. In this intimate silence, the foundations of physics begin to shift, not with a thunderclap, but with the gentle persistence of a patient mind. The year 1905 blossoms into spring. The chestnut trees along the avenues unfold canopies of fresh green, and the river runs high with snow melt from the distant Alps. Albert, now 26, fills his notebooks with an intensity that surprises even himself. During his lunch breaks at the patent office, he walks alone to a nearby park and sits on a bench overlooking the water. Ducks paddle lazily in the shallows, and the air is sweet with the scent of blooming lindens. In these stolen moments, for papers take root, each one destined to reshape the understanding of space, time, and matter. He ponders the dance of Brownian particles, the quantum nature of light, the strange linking of energy and mass. The ideas come not as blinding flashes, but as quiet realizations, like the slow brightening of dawn after a long, patient night. He jots down notes in a small leather-bound book, then returns to his desk and the stack of patent applications, his secret joy hidden behind a calm expression. When the papers are published in the Anlin der Physik, the world does not immediately notice. Bern remains as peaceful as ever. The trams continue their clatter, the fountain bears continue their silent watch, and the river continues its unhurried journey to the Rhine. Albert himself continues his daily routine, walking to the office, playing his violin in the evening, helping Mileva with their infant son, Hans Albert. The rocking cradle in the lamplight brings a new rhythm to the household. At dusk, he sometimes carries the baby to the window and points to the first evening star, whispering about the light that travels across the universe to reach their eyes. Outside, the Ziklogs' painted figures parade past the clock face, their tiny spears and scepters gleaming in the last light. The city wraps itself in a hush, and the young physicist, still virtually unknown, feels a quiet contentment that has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with the warm presence of family and the endless beauty of the questions that remain. The years in Bern unspool like a gentle stream. Promotions come slowly, but the rhythm of his days stays the same. In 1908, he moves to a slightly larger apartment with a balcony that overlooks a garden of roses. On warm summer evenings, he brings his violin outside and plays Bach suites while the sky turns lavender and peach. The notes drift over the rooftops, mingling with the distant sound of church bells. Neighbors pause in their dinner preparations to listen, their windows open to the fragrant air. Inside, the table is set with simple bread, cheese, and a jug of white wine. Friends sometimes join them, fellow physicists, artists, philosophers, and the conversation meanders through science and music until the candles burn low. These are the last tranquil years in Switzerland before the currents of destiny will carry him to Berlin and, eventually, across the Atlantic. But in this moment, on this balcony, with the stars beginning to prick the velvet sky, Albert Einstein is simply a man in love with the music of the spheres, a dreamer in a patent office whose quiet dreams have already touched the infinite. As the decade closes, an invitation arrives that will slowly pull him away. The University of Zurich offers a professorship, then Prague, and then a call back to Zurich. Each move brings new colleagues, new lecture halls, but the essence of the man remains unchanged. He still carries a notebook everywhere, still walks with his head slightly tilted as if listening to a distant melody. Light continues to be his constant companion, whether it streams through the tall windows of a lecture hall or plays across the surface of the Limmat River. In his mind, the search for a deeper theory of gravity has begun. He dreams of elevators falling through empty space and spaceships accelerating among the stars, imagining how light would bend under the pull of a massive body. These thoughts are companions on his solitary walks, as peaceful and persistent as the river's flow. The patent office years, with their golden lamplight and quiet afternoons, have prepared him perfectly for the larger journey ahead, like the slow tuning of an instrument before a great symphony. By 1914, the gravitational pull of scientific prestige has drawn Albert Einstein to Berlin. The city is a bustling metropolis of broad boulevards, imperial palaces, and deep forests at its edge. He takes a position at the Prussian Academy of Sciences, and a new chapter opens in a stately apartment on the third floor of a Wilhelmine building. Tall windows let in the pale northern light, which falls across his desk and the ever-growing stacks of papers. Outside, the chestnut trees along the street cast long shadows in the afternoon, and the distant rumble of city traffic is softened by the double-glazed glass. The apartment is filled with the scent of coffee and chalk dust, for a blackboard stands in the corner of his study, covered with equations that twist and curve like the orbits of planets. Berlin seethes with energy, but Albert carves out a quiet sanctuary within it. He rises early, when the streets are still misty, and the first birds test their calls in the park across the way. In this fragile hour between night and day, he wrestles with the profoundest puzzle yet: how to reconcile gravity with the geometry of space and time. The Grunewald forest becomes his refuge. Only a short tram ride from the city center, it is a vast expanse of towering pines, silver birches, and mirror-still lakes. On Sundays, Albert escapes there with his violin and a picnic basket, accompanied by his cousin Elsa, who will later become his second wife. They walk along sandy paths dappled with sunlight, the forest floor soft with fallen needles. The air smells of resin and damp earth, and the only sounds are the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a cuckoo. By the shore of the Schlachten Sea, they spread a blanket and sit in comfortable silence. Albert often takes out a small notebook and jots down tensor equations, the symbols flowing from his pen as naturally as the water lapping at the roots of the alder trees. Here, away from the clamor of academic committees and the growing political tensions in the streets, he feels the presence of that universal harmony he had sensed as a boy with a compass. The forest holds its breath, and within it, a new understanding of the cosmos slowly crystallizes. Back in his study, the work intensifies. The years from 1915 to 1917 are a crucible of concentration. The Great War rages far to the west, but its distant thunder rarely penetrates this room. Albert, a pacifist by deep conviction, folds himself into the abstract world of curved space-time. The blackboard fills and empties and fills again, chalk dust sifting down like fine snow onto the carpet. Meals grow cold on a side table as he stares out the window, watching the clouds move across the Prussian sky. The geometry is relentless, demanding, yet at moments it yields to a breathtaking elegance. He visualizes massive stars sinking dimples into the fabric of space and planets moving along the gentle slopes of that cosmic landscape. In November 1915, the final pieces of the field equations click into place. He leans back in his chair, a quiet awe settling over him. There is no explosion of joy, only a deep, profound stillness, as if the universe itself had let out a soft breath of relief. The world outside eventually learns of this new theory, but the revelation comes not from a laboratory on Earth, but from the sky itself. In 1919, a British expedition led by Arthur Eddington sails to the island of Principe off the coast of Africa to observe a solar eclipse. The plan is to photograph the positions of stars near the eclipsed sun to see if their light bends, as general relativity predicts. The measurements are made on a humid tropical afternoon, beneath a canopy of swaying palms and the eerie half-light of totality. When the results reach Berlin months later, they confirm Einstein's predictions with stunning accuracy. At that moment, the quiet man who loved walks in the forest becomes a global icon. But the fame, when it arrives, feels like something that belongs to another person. Albert receives the news in his study, nods gently, and turns back to the window. The sun sets over the rooftops, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold, and he thinks not of headlines, but of the beautiful, silent curvature of light. Despite the world's adoration, his daily life in Berlin retains a simple rhythm. He still walks to the academy each morning, a rumpled figure in a soft-brimmed hat, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The porters at the gate know him by sight and greet him with a gentle tip of the cap. In the lecture hall, he speaks in a low, unhurried voice, often pausing to draw diagrams on the board. Students listen with rapt attention, not because of his reputation, but because they sense they are in the presence of a mind that sees the world differently, like a man who perceives colors invisible to ordinary eyes. After lectures, he sometimes joins colleagues at a cafe on Unter den Linden, where the coffee is strong and the conversation drifts from quantum puzzles to the music of Mozart. The cafe windows look out onto the broad boulevard, where lime trees filter the afternoon sun. Outside, the city bustles with trams and carriages, but inside, time slows down, wrapped in the aroma of roasted beans and the companionable murmur of voices. At home, the violin remains his voice. In the evenings, after the dinner plates have been cleared, he stands by the open window and plays. The melodies of Bach and Vivaldi float out into the courtyard, where the neighbors' windows are also open to catch the cool air. Sometimes a child practicing piano in another apartment will pause to listen, and for a moment the entire building shares a quiet harmony. Elsa sits in her armchair with her knitting, a small smile on her lips. The soft click of the needles forms a gentle counterpoint to the violin. In these hours, the great physicist is simply a husband, a musician, a man who finds solace in the same simple rituals that cradle any human heart. The chandelier overhead sparkles faintly, catching the last light of the evening. Outside, the stars begin to emerge one by one, distant pinpricks in the velvet dome, each one following a path that Einstein now understands better than anyone who has ever lived. Yet this peaceful cadence cannot last. The political currents of post-war Germany are growing dark. In the streets, nationalist groups foment anger and anti-Semitism rises like a chill fog. Einstein's name begins to appear on hate-filled pamphlets. He walks through the Grunewald and notices that some neighbors no longer return his nod. Even the forest seems quieter now, as if holding its breath against an approaching storm. His summer house at Caputh, a wooden lakeside retreat southwest of Berlin, becomes his last true German haven. There, surrounded by pine woods and the gentle lapping of water, he sails his small boat, the Tummler. The sails catch the breeze with a soft snap, and the hull slides through the silver lake with barely a whisper. He tacks back and forth for hours, alone with the wind and the wide sky. The water reflects the moving clouds, and for a little while, he can forget the gathering shadows. Standing at the tiller, his hand resting lightly on the wood, He resembles a figure from an older, quieter century, a philosopher adrift on a peaceful sea of thought. When the Nazis seize power in 1933, Albert is on a lecture tour in the United States. The news reaches him in California, and he knows immediately that he cannot return. With a heavy heart, he makes the decision to renounce his Prussian citizenship and never go back. In a quiet hotel room overlooking the Pacific, he writes a letter of resignation, the pen moving slowly across the page. Outside, the sun sets into the ocean in a blaze of crimson, and the waves crash gently on the shore far below. He feels a deep sadness, but also a strange, familiar peace. The universe has taught him that everything is in motion, that nothing stays fixed, and that even the brightest star will one day drift from its old constellation. He packs his few belongings, a violin, some manuscripts, a photograph of Elsa, and prepares to cross the Atlantic once more, this time toward a new home in a new world. The fabric of the cosmos stretches on, vast and gentle, cradling the exile in its immutable laws. In the autumn of 1933, the ocean liner Westernland cuts through the gray Atlantic swell, carrying a man who has just become a refugee. Albert Einstein stands at the railing of the upper deck, his coat collar turned up against the damp wind, watching the ship's wake fan out behind them like a widening path of white foam. The sky is overcast, but occasional breaks in the clouds allow columns of silver light to slant down onto the restless water. Gulls follow the ship, their cries thin and distant. Inside his pocket is a letter of acceptance from the newly founded Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. It offers not just a position, but a sanctuary. He wears his familiar felt hat, pulled low over his brow, and his expression is calm, almost distant. The sea has always been a second home to him, a place of solitude and contemplation. He thinks of the lake at Caputh, of the Tumler tilting under a summer breeze, and though sorrow brushes his heart, it does not overwhelm him. The ship plows steadily westward, and with each passing hour, the troubled continent of Europe fades further into the eastern mist. Below deck, in a modest cabin, his personal assistant and companion Helen Dukas organizes the few possessions they have managed to bring. A well-worn violin case rests on the narrow bed, beside a crate of books and manuscripts. The cabin is cozy, lit by a single porthole that shows the shifting gray and blue of the ocean. Albert often sits in the single armchair, a blanket over his knees, reading or simply gazing at nothing. Other passengers, recognizing him, sometimes approach with shy words of admiration. He receives them with a gentle nod and a kind, tired smile. But his real companions on this voyage are the sea birds and the rhythmic pulse of the engines. At night, when the ship is quiet, he climbs to the deck again to look at the stars. The constellations here are the same as those over Munich and Bern and Berlin, only the angle has changed slightly. The vast, unbroken panorama reminds him that he is part of an infinite order, and this thought brings a deep, abiding peace. He is not a victim of history, but a traveler following the same immutable laws that guide the planets. The ship makes landfall on a crisp October morning. New York Harbor glimmers under a brilliant blue sky, the Statue of Liberty rising from the water like a promise of refuge. Ferries and tugboats chug across the bay, their smokestacks trailing white plumes. Einstein stands at the railing and watches the city slowly assume its shape, the jagged skyline of Lower Manhattan, the delicate lacework of the Brooklyn Bridge. The air is fresh and carries the mingled sense of salt water and distant cooking from the streets. A throng of reporters waits on the pier, cameras at the ready, but the scene is not frantic. There is a certain order to it, a politeness, even a quiet cheer as the famous Exile steps onto American soil for the last time, this time to stay. He answers a few questions in his soft, accented English, his words carried away by the harbor breeze. Then, with Helen and a small group of welcoming academics, he is driven through the streets of the city toward the train station, the great adventure of his new life just beginning. The journey to Princeton takes them through the gentle landscapes of New Jersey. Outside the train window, the autumn colors are at their peak, maples blazing scarlet, oaks glowing russet, and fields of dried corn stubble glowing gold under the low October sun. The train moves at a leisurely pace, its whistle echoing through the wooded valleys. Einstein presses his forehead to the glass, much as he did during that long-ago journey from Munich to Italy. This landscape is different from Europe, softer, more rolling, with white clapboard houses and church spires peeking through the trees. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, and the occasional horse-drawn wagon crosses a covered wooden bridge. Peace settles over him like a familiar blanket. He knows that he will never again see the Grunewald or the Swiss Alps, but he also knows that home is not a place made of earth and stone. Home is a rhythm of thought, a few beloved faces, the feel of a violin beneath his chin, and the constant, reliable presence of light. Princeton itself appears like a page from an old storybook. Elm trees arch over quiet streets, their leaves forming a canopy of gold and amber. Colonial-era houses stand behind white picket fences, their windows aglow with warm yellow light. The university's Gothic spires rise above the tree-line, ivy climbing their stone walls. It is a town designed for walking and thinking, and Einstein takes to it immediately. The Institute for Advanced Study provides him with an office in a red brick building called Fold Hall, surrounded by lawns that slope gently down to a small lake. In those first days, he walks everywhere, exploring the campus and the surrounding woods. Squirrels dart across the paths, and the air smells of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The frantic noise of Berlin feels like another century, another life. Here, tranquility is not snatched in Sunday escapes to the forest, it is the very ground of daily existence. His new house at 112, Mercer Street, becomes the anchor of his American years. It is a simple, white clapboard house with green shutters, set back from the road by a neat lawn and a garden of hydrangeas and roses. Inside, the rooms are filled with light. The study, on the second floor, has a large window that overlooks the quiet street. A wooden desk sits beneath the window, and a blackboard, always a blackboard, stands against one wall. The scent of beeswax polish and old paper mingles with the faint aroma of the pipe he enjoys in the evenings. In the living room downstairs, a piano and his violin stand ready for the evening concerts that will become a cherished ritual. Neighbors pass by on the sidewalk and sometimes glance up at the window, knowing that the gentleman with the streaming white hair is inside, lost in thought. They do not disturb him. Princeton respects its famous resident by wrapping him in a cocoon of everyday ordinariness, the most precious gift a small town can offer a man who longs for peace. As the first winter approaches, his daily routine crystallizes. Each morning, dressed in a comfortable sweater and trousers, his hair uncombed, he sets out on foot for the institute, a 20-minute walk through the leaf-strewn paths. Often he carries no briefcase, just a small notebook in his pocket. He pauses on the bridge over the Carnegie Lake to watch the light shimmering on the water, the ducks drifting in their quiet flotillas. The cold air nips his cheeks, but he does not hurry. On the way back, he might stop at a small grocery store on Nassau Street, nodding hello to the shopkeeper, buying a loaf of fresh bread or a wedge of cheese. In the afternoon, he retreats to his study, the door slightly ajar, the house silent except for the scratch of his pen. Students rarely drop by unannounced, but when they do, he receives them warmly, offering tea and a seat by the fireplace. The fire crackles softly, its glow flickering across the bookshelves. Outside, the first snowflakes of December begin to fall, dusting the lawn and the rooftops with a gentle white. The exile has found his harbor, and the harbor has welcomed him with open, unhurried arms. Morning in Princeton begins with a soft diffusion of light through the elm leaves. On Mercer Street, the postman makes his rounds, his footsteps echoing quietly on the brick sidewalk. At number 112, the front door opens just after 8, and Albert Einstein steps out into the cool air. He wears a simple leather jacket over a sweater, no socks with his shoes, and his silver-white hair forms a halo in the early sunshine. He pauses on the porch to survey the garden, where the azaleas hold droplets of dew that glisten like tiny lenses. A robin sings from the branch of a dogwood tree, and down the street, a neighbor's cat stretches on a sun-warmed windowsill. The world is hushed, as if the town itself has agreed to tread softly around the man who sees the universe in a grain of sand. With a slight nod to no one in particular, he sets off along the familiar route to the institute, the same walk he will take nearly every day for more than 2 decades, a pilgrimage without destination because the walking itself is the prayer. The path leads him past the university's gray stone buildings, their ivy turning russet in the autumn, and across the delicate arch of the footbridge over Carnegie Lake. He often pauses at the midpoint of the bridge, resting his hands on the wooden railing. The water below is a mirror for the drifting clouds, and the weeping willows on the far bank trail their branches in the current. Turtles sun themselves on half-submerged logs, motionless as the stones around them. In this suspended moment, he might reflect on the unified field theory that has eluded him for years, but more likely he simply experiences the stillness, letting his mind drift like a leaf on the water. Students hurrying past on bicycles recognize him and slow down, their voices dropping to a respectful murmur. He smiles and waves a hand, a gesture that seems to bless the morning. Then he continues on his way, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes, until the red brick facade of Fold Hall appears through the trees. Inside his office, the atmosphere is one of ordered simplicity. A large window overlooks the south lawn, where wild rabbits sometimes graze at dawn. The walls are lined with bookshelves, but they are not overcrowded. There is an air of spaciousness, of mental clarity. A blackboard stands in one corner, chalked with equations that are less a finished product than a visible thought in progress. His desk is clear save for a blotter, a fountain pen, and a small wooden sculpture of a bird that someone gave him years ago. The room smells faintly of chalk dust and the wool of his jacket. He settles into his chair, which creaks in a familiar way, and gazes out the window for a long while before picking up his pen. For him, science is not a frantic race, but a slow, patient listening to the whispers of nature. The hours pass in quiet concentration, punctuated only by the occasional turning of a page or the distant toll of the campus bell. Students and colleagues who visit during his open office hours find him welcoming, but utterly unhurried, as if their question were the only thing in the world that mattered at that moment. Lunch is often taken on a bench in the institute gardens, weather permitting. He carries a simple packed meal in a brown paper bag, an apple, a cheese sandwich, perhaps a thermos of tea. The garden is a restful place, designed with winding paths and clusters of lavender that attract slow-moving bees. He sits in the dappled shade of a magnolia tree, the blossoms casting their sweet fragrance into the air. Sometimes his friend and colleague Kurt Gödel joins him. The two men, geniuses of different landscapes, walk together among the flowers, speaking in German about logic, time, and the possibility of a perfect world. Their steps are slow, their words measured. They do not debate so much as explore, like two travelers mapping the contours of a shared dream. In the garden's stillness, with the drone of bees as a soft background note, the boundary between physics and philosophy dissolves. Einstein finds this companionship one of the great consolations of his later years. It reminds him of the evenings in Zurich and Bern, when ideas flowed as freely as the river. Afternoons slide gently into early evening. The sun drops behind the sycamores, and the light takes on that rich, golden quality that painters love. Einstein walks home by a slightly different route, perhaps along the residential streets where children play in front yards and the scent of dinner cooking drifts from open kitchen windows. He arrives at 112 Mercer Street to find Helen Dukas tidying the living room or preparing a light supper. The house is warm and welcoming. He removes his jacket, settles into his favorite armchair by the fireplace, and picks up his violin. The first notes of a Mozart sonata fill the room, pure and unhurried. Upstairs, the blackboard stands in the study, but for now, the equations can wait. Music is his evening meditation, the gateway to a realm beyond words. The sound drifts out through the window screens, mingling with the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustle of the evening breeze. Passers-by on the sidewalk slow their pace, catching a strain of unexpected beauty, then smile and continue on their way. As night deepens, the house settles into silence. In the study, a small lamp burns late. Einstein often sits there until midnight, reading philosophy or adding a few more symbols to the blackboard. Outside, the town of Princeton sleeps under a canopy of stars that seem remarkably close in the clear American air. The elm trees cast intricate shadows on the moonlit lawn. Occasionally, an owl calls from the wooded park nearby, its hoot a soft, two-note lullaby. The great man rubs his tired eyes, removes his spectacles, and places them on the desk next to the wooden bird. Before heading to bed, he goes to the window and looks out at the constellations. The same Orion he watched as a boy in Munich, the same Pleiades he gazed at from the roof in Milan, the same steady glow that accompanied his voyage across the Atlantic. He feels an unbroken continuity, a thread of light running through all the years. With a gentle sigh, he draws the curtains and pads quietly down the hall to his simple bedroom. The house creaks once, then falls into a deep, restful hush. Weekends bring a different, even gentler rhythm. On Saturdays, Einstein often ventures to the small boathouse on Carnegie Lake. There, a modest sailboat named Tin of bobs at the dock, a gift from friends who knew his love of the water. He rigs the sails with practiced hands, the cotton sheets luffing softly in the breeze. Then he pushes off and drifts into the middle of the lake, where the wind catches the canvas and fills it with a satisfying pull. For hours, he tacks in lazy zigzags, alone with the sky and the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. The shore recedes, and all sound fades except the wind and the occasional cry of a red-winged blackbird. Here, in this floating solitude, he finds a peace that even the study cannot provide. The water holds him like a cradle, and the physics of wind, water, and sail becomes a living diagram of the forces he has spent a lifetime describing. He does not think in equations now, only in sensations, the tilt of the deck, the cool spray on his cheek, the immense blue dome above. By late afternoon, when the shadows lengthen and the breeze slackens, he glides back to the dock, his mind clear and his heart light. And so the years in Princeton accumulate, soft as snowflakes. The world outside occasionally intrudes with news of war and suffering, and Einstein raises his voice for peace and justice in his quiet, unwavering way. But the core of his life remains the simple, luminous routine. He grows older gracefully, his hair turning from silver to pure white, his steps slowing but never losing its purpose. The town watches over him like a guardian angel. Shopkeepers keep his favorite items in stock. The mailman delivers letters from all over the world. Students paint his portrait in watercolor and leave it on the porch. Through it all, he remains the same man who sat on a wooden floor in Munich, holding a compass and sensing the invisible. The unified theory eludes him to the end, but he does not mourn its absence. What matters is the beauty of the search, the quiet thrill of each dawn that brings a new chance to listen to the cosmic whisper. In Princeton, bathed in the golden light of an Indian summer, the seeker has found not all the answers, but an enduring peace. The later years of Einstein's life unfold with the slow grace of a summer evening. His body, once sturdy enough for long mountain walks and sailing in strong winds, now moves with a careful deliberateness. Yet the light in his eyes has not dimmed. If anything, it has grown softer, more inward, like a lamp seen through frosted glass. In the mornings, he still rises early, though he might linger a little longer at the kitchen table, sipping tea and watching the sparrows flit among the rosebushes. The garden, now well established, has become a small paradise of color and scent. Helen keeps the household running smoothly, ensuring that the great mind is undisturbed by trivialities. Visitors come less frequently these days, and that suits him. The world beyond Princeton's elm-lined streets seems increasingly loud, obsessed with the very things he fled long ago. He has no interest in the frantic tempo of the atomic age, even though his own early work laid part of its foundation. That is a legacy he regards with a somber, reflective sorrow, not with pride. He now devotes his public voice almost exclusively to the cause of peace, speaking with a gentle urgency that carries the weight of decades. Inside his study, the blackboard has become a palimpsest of unfinished thoughts. The unified field theory, that beautiful dream of a single equation to encompass all forces, remains a horizon he can see but never touch. It does not distress him. He once said that God does not play dice with the universe, but he has long since made his peace with the idea that the ultimate design may remain forever mysterious. His notebooks from these years are filled not only with physics, but with philosophical reflections, musings on Spinoza and Schopenhauer, and letters to friends around the world. The fountain pen scratches across the page, its rhythm as steady and soothing as the tick of the clock. Outside the window, the seasons cycle, the pale green of spring, the lush fullness of summer, the glorious fire of autumn, and the deep white hush of winter. He sits in his armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket, and watches the snow fall, each flake a tiny geometry of ice crystals. The silence of a snowy afternoon is his favorite kind of music now. One of the joys of his old age is the friendship he has formed with a young neighbor girl, a child who stops by on her bicycle to ask for help with her arithmetic homework. Legends have grown around this, but the truth is simpler and more tender. The girl, whose name history remembers variously, would ring the doorbell with a hopeful expression, her textbook clutched to her chest. Einstein would invite her into the kitchen, pour her a glass of milk, and sit down beside her at the wooden table. With infinite patience, he would guide her through fractions and decimals, never making her feel foolish for her confusions. In return, she would tell him about her day at school, about her cat, about the small dramas of childhood. Her cheerful voice brought a lightness to the house that even Mozart could not. The contrast between the towering intellect and the simple tasks of elementary arithmetic never struck him as strange. He understood that the great mysteries and the small ones are woven from the same thread, and that kindness is the most fundamental law of all. As the 1950s advance, his health begins a slow decline. There are days when the walk to the institute is too much, and he must content himself with a bench in the garden. He sits there for hours, a blanket over his knees, watching the play of light and shadow on the lawn. The robin that nested in the dogwood tree returns each spring, and he greets it like an old friend. The university acknowledges his presence as a living treasure, but he asks for no special treatment. When he feels well enough, he still receives students in his study, offering tea and biscuits and answering their questions with the same gentle thoroughness he had in Bern. They often leave in a state of quiet awe, not because of any profound revelation he imparted, but because of the peace that radiated from him. To sit with Einstein was to sit beside a calm, deep lake. His very presence seemed to still the anxious ripples of the mind. In April 1955, the inevitable hour draws near. An abdominal aortic aneurysm that has troubled him for years finally reaches its crisis. He is taken to the Princeton hospital, a modest building not far from the university. The room is simple, white, with a window that looks out onto a small courtyard where a single cherry tree is in full bloom. Petals drift lazily down onto the grass like confessions of pink light. In the bed, Einstein rests quietly, his silver hair spread on the pillow. His family and close friends gather, but there is no drama, no desperate clinging. He has always viewed life and death as part of the same cosmic order, a transformation of energy from one form to another. When the doctors offer surgical intervention, he gently refuses. "I want to go when I want," he says softly. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it is time to go." His words carry the same simple clarity as his equations, stripping away all excess. During the night of April 17th, the courtyard is bathed in silver moonlight. The cherry blossoms continue their silent fall. Inside the hospital room, a nurse sits by his side, keeping a quiet vigil. In his final hours, he mutters a few sentences in German, but the nurse does not speak the language, and the words, destined to become one of history's great mysteries, evaporate into the sterile air. Was it a final equation, a small private prayer, or simply a sleepy murmur about a cup of tea? No one will ever know, and perhaps that is fitting. The man who illuminated so many dark corners of the universe took his last whisper with him into the infinite, leaving behind a luminous silence. At 1:15 in the morning, his heart stops. Outside, the cherry blossoms stir gently in the breeze, and the campus bell tower tolls softly, as if regretting the passage of a great, gentle soul. According to his wishes, the ceremony after death is utterly simple. There is no state funeral, no public viewing, no grand eulogy. His body is cremated that very day in Trenton, and his closest friends gather in a quiet memorial at the nearby chapel. The words spoken are few and inadequate, as words always are in the presence of the ineffable. His ashes are scattered in a secret place, most likely along the banks of the Delaware River or into the air above a quiet field, where they mingle with soil and wind and water. He returns, as he would have wished, to the elements. The only monument he leaves is the one he built over a lifetime, a vast, invisible architecture of understanding that will shelter curious minds for as long as humans gaze at the stars. In the Princeton garden, the roses continue to bloom. In the Institute, the blackboard is erased for the last time. The house on Mercer Street falls quiet, but it is not a sorrowful quiet. It is the stillness of a workshop at the end of a long, productive day, when the craftsman sets down his tools and goes to rest. And what remains? Not the equations, though they live on in libraries and laboratories. Not the famous face, though it will grace posters and t-shirts for generations. What remains is a quality of light. The memory of a gentle man who walked slowly, played his violin in the twilight, and never stopped wondering at the compass needle that pointed north. A man who sailed on small lakes and great oceans, who found refuge in a quiet American town, and who met the universe not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a friend to be known. To fall asleep with Einstein is to drift into that same peaceful curiosity. Close your eyes now and imagine the Princeton autumn, the golden leaves falling softly on Mercer Street. Imagine the sound of distant violin music, the gentle lapping of Carnegie Lake, the quiet scratch of a pen in the lamplit study. The cosmos expands quietly around you, not as a cold void, but as a warm, breathing presence. You are safe here, cradled in the fabric Einstein spent his life learning to touch. The stars will overhead, and the world turns silently, and somewhere in the deep peace of this moment, his final lesson is whispered. Everything is connected, everything moves in harmony, and every night leads to a new and gentle dawn.